Well, hello there. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Rusty, and this is my channel where I talk about my favorite movies, mostly horror, and my favorite music, mostly metal. And tonight, me and Chucky are going to talk to you about one of my favorite movies from the 70s. Left an indelible image in my mind, even if it's only one image or sound or something, like that, one scene. If you see it young enough during your development, I guess it can just stick with you forever. And Coma happens to have one of those scenes that has stuck with me ever since I was a little kid. I went back to my note nerd ways because I tried doing some like with few notes, and I kept forgetting stuff that I wanted to mention. Not that I forgot the movie, but that I forgot, oh, I wanted to mention that when I rewatched it. I'm like, I forgot this part and I forgot that part that I wanted to say something about. So I've gone back to being a total note nerd because why not? It's okay. So Coma was released in 1978, and it stars Michael Douglas, Rip Torn, Geneviève Bujold, Richard Widmark, and a couple of really cool little cameos by future stars. Ed Harris is in it in a few scenes. He plays one of the technicians in the lab. And who else? Right out of my head that went Tom Selleck. Tom Selleck has a really short cameo in this. It's kind of amazing because I really don't like Tom Selleck, but when you look back at what he looked like in 1978, you kind of see why he became such a, sex symbol in the early 80s. But yeah, so we are going to talk about Coma. This is my 4-movie pack. Each one of them is on its own disc. So, but yeah, right there we have Coma. Yes. So, what is Coma? So as we begin the movie, we are introduced to Mark and Susan. That's Michael Douglas and Geneviève Bujold. They play doctors at Boston Hospital, where they are both physicians. Now this was 78, so there's a little bit of the, well, there's still that today, but it was a lot stronger in 78. These two powerful individuals with gender roles going on. So their relationship isn't exactly stable. They have a lot of arguments, and you can tell from the beginning that they are rather bitchy towards one another. So as we're introduced to them, we get to see a little bit of their interpersonal relationships. They both have their own apartment, but they're sort of staying together, and they can like have a fight and run off whenever they choose. So as the movie begins, we see a lot of that little dynamic going on, and then the plot of the movie really starts. And that's when, I wish I could remember her name, I could go look it up, but her friend from aerobics class, yes, there was an aerobics class before Jane Fonda and Olivia Newton-John. But there was sort of like this aerobics class, or what was about to become, the aerobics craze. And she has a friend who, interestingly enough, I remember her from Dallas. She was one of the, not one night stands, she was one of the like Deborah Shelton. She was one of JR's main mistresses. And also, oh yeah, I remember. See, it's coming back to me. She was actually very, very rich herself. She played the daughter of another oil baron. And why am I talking about Dallas? But that's who she is. She, and her name is right on the tip of my tongue. But she's the daughter of a rich oil man, and she takes over the company. and her and JR have an affair, and a bunch of crap goes down. She's there for a couple of seasons, but she is Geneviève Bujold's friend, and she goes in for just a standard procedure, and Susan is like, or no need to be afraid. This is a very pretty routine procedure, and there's no reason to be, worried or scared of this. So she does go in for this procedure, and then during the procedure, the only thing that happens is there is a heart flutter called a PVC. This is a little incident that can happen to you during anesthesia, where your heart just flutters just a little bit, but then everything is fine. So she has one of those, a transient PVC, and they're scared for a second, but then everything is fine and it goes as planned. They get through with the procedure, and then interestingly, cinematography. Oh, and this is by Michael Crichton. You know what I mean? So, yeah, big wig and thrillers. But so before, as the guy was explaining anesthesia, and I think they did this for impact, they showed you how the pupils dilate, open, and close when they're unconscious. And that's how he was explaining, this is how we know they're still okay, because their pupils open and close. So when the procedure is over after this little incident, they open up her eyes, and you can really tell the difference, because like she won't wake up. And then they open her eyes, and you actually get to see what you see it in all these shows, all their pupils are fixed and dilated. Well, they really like show you what that looks like, and wow, the pupil is like almost all of your coloring in your eye is taken up by that pupil. It's so big. So she's in a coma, and when Mark finds out, he overhears the doctors talking about it. He knows he has to call his girlfriend, Susan, who was her best friend. So my notes are being blown over by the fan, which is necessary in Florida, even with the air on. There is a fan bringing the air conditioner to me 6 feet away. But, so he has to call her and tell her. Now, she is understandably upset, but she doesn't want to look like an emotional, hysterical woman. So she tries to play it off. She talks about it in medical terms, wanting to know what's happened, what's going on. And he's like, come on, you're upset. And she just keeps playing it off. I mean, she really is. But she keeps playing it off because actually she's got this conflict. She's very upset that she was her friend, but she also doesn't understand why this has happened in such a routine, no problem procedure. So she starts she wants to see the chart, and she wants to look at it, and this whole time, Mark is like, okay, well, So he doesn't really help her much in her investigation as she tries to get this information that she needs to try to make herself feel better. So, she ends up getting very suspicious very quickly because she can't see anything in the charts that would cause this. So she ends up going up to the lab, and she's doing all of this to distract herself at the beginning. I mean, this was her best friend who is now in an irreversible coma. And so she does want some answers. So she ends up going up into the computer room, wanting to know how many people, how come this one thing that she notices that looks odd in her records is that she was tissue typed. People don't get tissue typed for a routine procedure. This will help you to know some medical knowledge if you watch the movie. People don't get, for routine procedures, you don't get tissue typed. Tissue typed is something that they do for you, especially if they think they may have to replace blood, replace organs, or you're an organ donor. to tissue type you. So she wondered, why was her friend tissue typed? This leads her upstairs to the computer techs, wanting to know why there's no signature on the tissue typing order. She manages to talk the tech into giving her a list, because they can't figure out how to pull up the computer algorithm. They can't figure out which one to use to get the information she wants. Finally, she just comes up with, well, can you just tell me all of the people in this hospital who has had, went into an irreversible coma in the last year. Now, it was a big list, and they're like, well, we get 30,000 patients a year, and so, I think there was like 200 and something, which is outrageous in my opinion. But irreversible ones and young healthy individual was only 10, now 11. So she wants to look at those files, only to find out that the chief of anesthesia has them all. So she goes to see him, and this is where we get to see Rip Torn. He is Dr. George. He is the chief anesthesiologist. He happens to have all the files. She's nosing around, going, hey, can I take a look at them? I want to see. And he's like, what are you doing? And you're really suspicious of him, because he doesn't want her to look at the files, and he doesn't want to, he wants, how dare you think that you can see something in these files that we haven't caught, because we haven't caught, different doctors, different procedures, different genders. There was nothing that connected these 10 cases that they could find. So how dare you think you could find what we cannot? And probably the sexist thing was in there too, a female on top of it. So she ends up finding a way to get, to get a hold of them so that she can look at them as well. And she secretly wrote down the information that she wanted from them. Now, it doesn't take long before she gets called by the big boss of the hospital. Now, you have to understand, at this time, Mark, her boyfriend, he is being considered to replace the outgoing chief of surgery. So there's a bunch of hospital politics going on as well. And she ends up getting called in to, the big guy, which is played by Richard Widmark, and he wants to know, what the hell do you think you're doing? Did you accuse the chief anesthesiologist at this hospital of not knowing what the fuck he's doing? You know what I mean? And so she really doesn't, know how to play it off, but because of his sexist behavior, she decides to play into that. And is, oh, I'm sorry, I was just so emotional, and stuff like that, because she knows her ass is on the line and she could get in trouble. So he confronts her and makes her go, see a psychologist, and then you see the Dr. Harris and the psychologist talking about, oh, she's just an emotional woman, blah, blah, blah. So let's see where we're at. This is about the time that we get introduced to the Tom Selleck. He's a football player. He's in for a standard low-risk procedure, and she sees him for a very short period of time as he's being, intook, and the doctors are standing around and talking with him and stuff. So she sees him for a very short period of time, and so like I said, she had secretly kept this list, and she had, like I said, met that Sean. She had saw the Sean guy, who was played by Tom Selleck, only to see later on, the next day after his procedure, he was in a coma too. So there's been two young, healthy individuals with very minor procedures going on who are in irreversible comas. And and this is when she first hears about this Jefferson Institute, where, she overhears them talking about this Jefferson Institute that they send their coma patients to. Um, so after doing all of this, Mark has becoming. You start to suspect Mark at this time too, because she is like really saying that something is going on, and Mark keeps pushing it away like there's not. And I became really, really suspicious of Mark. Mark seemed like he was being overly dismissive, not just sexist, not just, you're creeping on my politics. I mean, I can't be involved with a person who is causing distraction and trauma. You've got the chief mad, you've got the chief anesthesiologist mad, you've got the owner of the hospital mad, and I'm dating you, and I'm up for chief of surgery. So he's got his little thing going as well. And at first you try to sort of blame that on his behavior, that he's just worried about the politics. But he still seems to be overly dismissive of this whole thing, because even you are seeing what she is suspicious about. So Nancy, because she's made so much noise about her friend, she then finds out that Nancy dies. Nancy is dead. And she wonders, when she tries to find out why she died, it's like, well, she probably died on the way to this Jefferson Institute, which she has been hearing this name, and it's gotten her curious about what this is as well. So she begins to talk with other professionals who really don't know anything or why she's doing it, why she's asking these questions about what could put a person into a coma. Now this is where she went to the lab down into the cadaver room, the morgue, where that's where we get to see Ed Harris, the young Ed Harris is in there, and she's talking to them about, how could you put someone into a coma? And one of them they suggest several things, but one of them, he suggests perhaps carbon dioxide. That would work. And Ed Harris is like, oh no, that's boring. You want to use hexacholine, you want to do this, and he's like, yeah, but that would be the simplest way. And when he said to her, the reason it would be so simple is because it is undetectable. And you would never know it was happening, because the only thing carbon monoxide would do is cause, instead of oxygen, if you were being fed that during anesthesia, would be that it would cause a momentary transient PVC, as it basically fried your brain, starved your brain. So your heart and your brain would react, but then it would settle into the coma, and they wouldn't know it until they tried to wake you up. Now this sounds really on the money to her, right? Because she's like, well, that's kind of exactly what happened. And of course now she's also dealing with knowing that this Sean guy. So, as you can imagine, she's called back in again to the chief of the hospital, who wants to know, why now she's down in the morgue playing some conspiracy theory shit. So he bitches her out again, and this is where she really plays up his sexism, because she needs him to stop taking her seriously, because if he believes that she's serious about this investigation, then he's going to believe she's going to continue. And he's made it very clear she does not need to continue this investigation. So she starts crying and talking about how it's just been so hard and it was such a, problem. And in other words, she plays the "I'm a hysterical woman" card, because that actually does calm him down, and he backs off and tells her to take the weekend off. And so that she actually uses his own sexism to get out of the tongue lashing that she's getting. So her and Mark go away for the weekend, that she was told to go away for the weekend. Now, on the way home, though, before she tells Mark about this latest incident, she begins to be stalked, by this strange guy that, like, her car wouldn't start. Then when she tried to get on the train, she noticed him noticing her as she was getting on the plane. On the train, and it kind of scares her. It's a spooky little stalking scene, and when she does get back to Mark, he ends up, she tells him about it, and he once again is very, very dismissive of her, of her reality. So she stops kind of trusting him, and so did I, and so would you watching the movie. But they go away on this little vacation, and they seem to have fun on the weekend. However, she realizes that she's very close. Where they went is very close to this Jefferson Institute. So she gets him to stop by the Institute. She goes in, and it's a very creepy place. Only a few staff. She can't figure out what's going on. This nurse comes out who is so creepy because she acts like an android, and tells her, oh, I'm sorry you're early. The tour is next Tuesday. And she kind of plays into that. Like, oh, okay, yeah. I just thought I would stop in early. And the nurse, oh, no, you can't. We do the tour on Tuesday. We'll see you then. Bye. So she leaves kind of frustrated, but with a plan. Now she knows that she can get access to this facility Tuesday. She doesn't tell Mark. So, while she gets back to the hospital after the weekend, we get a break in the case. And that is that at this little party that they're having in the staff room, everybody's there. Dr. George, the boss, Mr. Harris, Mark, everybody's there. But there's a maintenance man who kind of like manages to get close to her and kind of whispers without being obvious that he needs to talk to her, right? That he had heard she had been asking questions, and that he had some information that she might be interested in. And she, they try to be all James Bond about it, and she's like talking out the side of her mouth, like, what is it? What are you trying to say? And he said, well, there's something down in the basement that you need to see. If you're wondering how they're doing this, I can tell you how they're doing this. And she's like, what, the Comas? So she knows there's something about the basement. And he's like, we'll talk. Meet me down there. Well, interestingly enough, while he's down there waiting for her, that same hitman comes in and kills him ugly by basically throwing him into the circuit breakers and electrocuting him right as she arrives to meet him. So she actually walks up and witnesses him hooked to the circuit breakers being fried, and it's a pretty interesting scene. And then of course he's dead. and she freaks out and you know, starts yelling and running and all. But she did notice something, and that was she noticed big CO2 canisters. So he, um, the cops come and all of that, but she manages to go back down into the basement. And when she's down there, she starts following the tube lines. Now, there's one other thing about all of those cases. Once she had gotten a hold of the case files, there literally was only one thing that connected them. They were all in OR8, which is the one operating room out of like 30. All 12 now of these young, healthy individuals went into an irreversible coma after having a procedure done in OR8. So you got this nice long scene where she's following the, you know, the gas lines. Picture like little aquarium, like in your fish tank aquarium, the line from the pump to the filter. So she's following that, and she ends up like going all up through the rafters and into the crawl spaces, and she actually finds this little electronic box, with the tubes going through it, the lines going through it, and going down into the ceiling, into the wall of OR8. So she pretty much believes that, you know, she has figured all of this out. So now that she knows what's going on, she is like extremely pushy, extremely scared, and as a matter of fact, that night before she can get out, you know, when she went and told Mark about the OR8 thing, he still like pushes it away. I mean, he really was a sexist dick, because she had all of this proof, and yet he is still, you know, like very dismissive. He is so fascinated with and obsessed with his, you know, the political side of his little desires, that he is just really ignoring, you know, everything that goes on and placating her. Now, she goes back to the hospital because she wants to get more evidence. Only this time, the hitman is there, and he comes after her. And you get, there's not a whole lot of good hospital stalking scenes and chase scenes like Halloween 2. But this one was a good one, because that final girl chase scene type deal went on for a good 15 minutes, at least 15 minutes, maybe more, as this guy is trying to get her. And there's some really interesting, I don't know if you, it might be more than 15 minutes. It's huge, and it takes place in the amphitheater and the morgue and the body shop, you know, like where they keep all the bodies. And there's some pretty gross scenes throughout this chase, and she finally does manage to get away. And she goes to Mark again, and this time she's hysterical, for real, but then again, anyone would be. And she tells him all about this stuff, and she, you know, is so upset that she lets him kind of placate her and lay down and rest and stuff like that. And then she wakes up and she hears him on the phone, and she goes in there, and you can hear him on the phone with somebody going, you know, yeah, she's here, I'll take care of it, you know, and stuff like that. And just like that, you're like, I knew that motherfucker was in on this shit. And that's exactly what she thinks. And so, uh, while he's in the kitchen, she disappears. And she doesn't go back to her place either. She goes and hides out in a motel and refuses, you know, she kind of calls to check in, like, do I have any messages at the hospital? And they try this really stupid attempt at getting her location, which made her know, shit. So she's on her own, in her opinion. So her next move is to go to the Jefferson Institute. So she goes to the Jefferson Institute on Tuesday, which is what she was waiting for, to have this tour. And then we get to, so she goes with the group of doctors on this tour of the facility, and they answer all their questions and talk about it. And we do get to that scene that I told you about at the beginning, when I was a little kid and I saw this in some rerun or on a cable channel or something. Whenever I saw it, we get to see the scene where all the naked bodies, except for the cloth over them, is suspended from the wires. That scene stuck with me all my life because it was just such a WTF scene. When they went through there and all those people in the coma were hanging from those wires, and they were explained how the institute works. They're kept like that until they have a visitor. Then they're put into a regular hospital looking room. The visitors see them looking normal. They leave. Then they put them back up on the wires. So when the tour is over, the other doctors leave, and she manages to slip away and stay behind and go snooping. And there really is only a couple of computer techs, a couple of security guys, and that creepy nurse. So, there's maybe like 7 people that staff this giant, huge facility. So as she is snooping around, one of the first things that she does is she ends up in a locker room where these 2 surgeons are changing, and she's overhearing their conversation where they're talking about, do you think that, do you think that kidney will make it to Dallas? How much did they get for that liver? And you start going, oh my God, it's like body harvesting, right? It's organ harvesting. And that's what you can see, that realization come over her face as well. Especially when she gets into a operating room where there is Tom Selleck, and he has been cut open, and they're talking about selling his organs. And then you see that nurse and her little IT techs, they are on the phone and they're actually auctioning off these organ parts. Like we have a kidney, the current bid is 45,000. How fast can we get it to Switzerland? And stuff like that. So, yeah, that's what's going on. Now she, of course, it answers everything, right? And I'll be damned. She'd gotten away with it all this time, but then a security guard sees her on CCTV and the chase is on. So we have once again a really big tension-filled chase scene, with her going through the rafters again. I mean, Geneviève Bujold, you know what I'm telling you? This girl was Spider Girl, you know what I mean? So she's going through the rafters and everything again. And she does manage to escape by leaving on the ambulance that was taking the organs to the airport to get them sent out, I guess, to the buyers. So she manages to get back to town, And she takes all this information to Dr. Harris, the leader of the hospital. Now you have to remember, because some people would go, well, wasn't he a suspect? Not really. I suspected Mark, her boyfriend, and I suspected they made Rip Torn, the anesthesiologist, they made him look the most guilty. They made it look like, he is the one that you would have chosen as the person most likely to be in charge of this operation. So when she goes and tells all of this information to Dr. Harris, she had also heard that nurse back at the Jefferson Institute talking about George. George would take care of it. So once again, you and her were led to believe that Dr. George, played by Rip Torn, was probably the leader of this stuff, and she had went to the chief of the hospital, and as she's sitting there talking to him, he fixes her a drink, and he starts talking to her, and he immediately starts talking this weird shit about how people just don't understand, and they don't value their lives, and overpopulation, and all kinds of stuff like that. And as she's listening to his bullshit, she's looking at his certificates on the wall. And she finally zooms in on one and notices that it's Dr. George Harris. So between him basically confessing and her seeing that, she knew she was beyond fucked. And she also started feeling delirious because he had drugged her. So all three of these revelations sort of hit her at the same time. And what do? There was nothing for her to do, as he informs her that she is got appendicitis and needs an operation. So they get her, she's passed out. He goes and tells everyone that, she's having an appendicitis, acute appendicitis, and needs an operation, and that he'll perform it himself. So they, of course, are all like, you'll be all right, honey. You've got the chief of the hospital doing the surgery for you. How lucky can you be? And her boyfriend, Mark, comes. And she, of course, is telling him, please don't do this. Don't let them do this. It's OR8, that's what it is. I told you, and I know, I have the proof. I know everything now. So she's trying to say this while she is completely drugged up. And he's trying to comfort her, you'll be all right, and stuff like that. And then the fuck up happens. And that is Dr. Harris looks at him and says, do you want to scrub up? Because he wanted a witness. He wanted more witnesses than just Anastasia. Who's the best witness you can have, right? Would be her boyfriend. So at this moment, though, you're still thinking, well, he wants him to scrub up because he's part of it. However, when the nurse comes out and says, we have OR10 ready, Dr. Harris is like, I told you to have OR8. And she's like, well, it's still not sterilized. It's not ready. And he's like, well, get it ready. I mean, he just makes a really big deal about getting her into OR8. It has to be OR8. Now we see a change come over Michael Douglas's face, Mark. We see a change come over his face when this little thing happens, because that's what she's been telling him all along. Okay, and you can see it come over his face like, why is this doctor making a big deal about getting her into OR8, right? And he like looks at the doctor and is like, and he goes to the phone and he pretends that he gets an emergency call and has got to go somewhere else. And instead, as they take her into the to OR8, he runs downstairs remembering what she had told him about what she had found, right? So he goes down there and starts following the lines and starts looking for the stuff that she had told him about. So we've got her under anesthesia now. The doctor has obviously flipped the switch, and you've got Michael Douglas down there who now you are going, okay, he's just an asshole. He's not part of this. He was just a sexist pig worried about his politics. Which I guess is a relief in one way, but he's still an asshole, but at least he's not part of this. So, so he manages to find the box, freak out, and smash it up. And back at the surgery, she did have a momentary flutter, a little transient flutter. But obviously it wasn't enough, because when the doctor is through and starts to walk out, it's like, oh, well, I guess I messed up. Her appendix was fine. I guess these things happen sometimes. And the anesthesiologist was like, should I bring her out now? And he's like, yeah. So he walks away from the bed with his back to it, and he's expecting any second to hear, doctor, she won't wake up. And he does hear, he's like, I don't know, she's not, and he's got satisfaction on his face. And then all of a sudden you hear the anesthesiologist say, oh wait, she's okay, and she coughs. And the look on Richard Widmark's face, Dr. Harris, just cracked. And he knew that was it. So she wakes up, and when the doors open and the nurse walks out, you can see Michael Douglas standing there with a bunch of cops, uniformed cops. And they wheel her out, and you see the reunion where Mark is like, you'll be okay now, and she's like, oh my god, I woke up. And so it's a big relief. And then you see Dr. Harris walking over to the x-rays, and you hear one of the cops say, we're waiting for you, Dr. Harris. And he turns off the x-ray, and screen black, all is revealed, movie's over. So that's Coma. Aside from my planes trains upset in the middle there, I got through that. But yeah, I absolutely love this movie. I think that it is a fantastic thriller. I would love to see like a rated R, more intense version of it. I do know that they made a mini-series, but I don't care about shit like that. I would like to see a straight up rated R remake of this movie with, of course, a little bit more stuff to it. But this movie stands up phenomenally. Why? Because this movie is about greed. This movie is about a horrible medical system, which we have. So, especially in America, the plot of this movie is more likely to take place now than it would in 1978. That's the reason why I believe this movie still holds up as a thriller, as a horror thriller, even more than it did in 1978. Some movies, especially their plots, can seem dated if things change. Like you You could make a historical retro drama about tearing down the Berlin Wall, but can you make a movie in real time about that? No, because it doesn't exist. So the plot of this movie isn't dated. The horrible medical system, greed, power, corruption, um, interpersonal politics. Um, Maybe some of the sexism isn't quite as bad, as it was. The theme, it's still there though, in on both sides actually. That just brought something up, didn't it? I wasn't actually. I don't. You know, that was. I made those for a couple of Trivium videos that I want to do for Johnny. Um, for the songs "Bleed Into Me" and what is it? "Heart in Your Hate" or "The Hate in Your Heart," whatever that song is. But I was going to do those, and that's what I made that for. But since we're sitting here talking about the theme of sexism, you know, there you go. Sexism still exists today, you know, um, but not as bad as 1978. And so, yeah, I think this movie holds up so well today, still, because um, the themes that are in this movie are even more possible, more believable. This exact plot, if it were uncovered and splashed all over social media about some hospital, no one would be surprised. Tell me they would. Okay, if the actual plot of this movie came out on MSNBC when, some whistleblower had, some kind of coma facility auctioning off body parts, none of you would believe, be surprised. So I think that's why Coma really lasts, really stands up today, just as it did in 1978, because the themes are real, the fear is real. My brother, he won't even go in for an endoscope. He's so scared of the healthcare. You know, he's like 40 something, and he won't even go in for like just a procedure. You know how many endoscopes, where they put the down your throat for your stomach? Um, I've had like 13 of them because I have gastritis, and he won't even go in for one because he's terrified of the medical community and anesthesia. So I think Coma scares people even today. This movie would scare you even today because the themes are still so possible and believable. And yeah, so 1978, Coma, Michael Douglas, Richard Widmark, Geneviève Bujold. Actually, I think she should get top billing. Geneviève Bujold, Michael Douglas, Richard Widmark, because she's the movie. She does everything in the movie. Everybody else is a supporting character to her. So, yeah, that was it. Nice little Ed Harris and Tom Selleck cameos. And that girl, I just can't think of her name, from Dallas. Um, but yeah, so if you haven't seen it, you really should. People might say, is this really a horror movie? It is to me, because the medical community is a horror movie for everyone. You know, these doctors in the U.S., you know, I mean, you are nothing but whatever your insurance number is. That's all you are to the medical community, and how much they can charge that number, if you know what I'm saying. So, yeah, Coma, 1978, Geneviève Bujold. Check it out if you haven't. Thank you very much for stopping by. I will see you in my next choice, which I've already scripted 3 more. Like my planes, trains disaster earlier. Doesn't seem to help when I get tongue-tied. But yes, I'll see you in the next one. Love you, miss you. Bye. Support indie horror, and always and never forget, you are a very special, important, and unique individual. And if you're wondering, I'm not high. It's this fan and air conditioner. I can't breathe. But I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye. Keep rocking very, very hard. And keep screaming only when appropriate, or you might get put into a hospital.